All right, welcome to the Unheard Outsider. I am your host, Q. Coming back this week with a wonderful, wonderful topic. I got some amazing people in the room today, which they will introduce themselves here shortly. For those that don't know me, I am the assistant director here at South Puget Sound Community College. I like to call myself a Blacktivist. I like to call myself a radical in a lot of sense, and a truth teller. And so that's just who I am. And so many other titles that I can't think of because age is approaching my brain. um, and so with that, this week we're talking about cancel culture versus accountability culture. And I have two amazing activists and scholars and friends, I like to call friends of mine in the room. And I would like to start us off with allowing the wonderful, amazing Sarah Lloyd to introduce herself to the people. Tell the people who you are and what you do.
What's up, people? I'm Sarah Lloyd, and I'm the principal disruptor for Soul on Fire Consulting. And I work with individuals to actualize radical change inside of their lives. And I work with organizations to operationalize what it looks like to be equitable organizations. I've been on my own for a year and a half doing the entrepreneur grind. And I'm blessed and fortunate to be here with you, Q. You are a friend of mine. I love you dearly. So thank you so much for having me today.
Awesome, no problem. And the wonderful, amazing Luis Ortega, who's just absolutely great. So and let Luis introduce who you are, tell the people who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, just wonderful to share space with you, Quentin, with you, Sarah, and with everyone that's listening. I'm Luis Ortega. I'm a multidisciplinary storyteller. I consider myself also a facilitator, an empathy educator, and a practitioner of storytelling as a practice of freedom. For me, that's very much grounded on what I think is a long tradition in my family of seeking to truly understand what does it mean to achieve collective liberation. And that's very much grounded, I think, in my ancestry that comes with lots of struggles, lots of baggage, but also a lot of joy and a lot of healing. And I struggle with all of that every time I show up in any space, thinking about not just the past, but also the role that I play in this particular moment, thinking about the future. So with that, all of that in mind, I'm super excited about this conversation. I've been thinking a lot about this subject matter of cancel culture and accountability culture. It's something that I think a lot about in my day-to-day work as director of Storytellers for Change. So thank you for the invitation, and happy to be with both of you, Sarah and Quentin.
Awesome, thank you. Well, honestly, I'm really happy we are delving into this conversation, especially on campus. I was telling people some of the episodes that are coming up, and this one particularly really hit home for a lot of people because not only are they engaged in conversation with this with their own staff, faculty members, people, their departmental students, family, and everyone having different perspectives of it. And it's hard for me because I'm the kind of person that I think really understands why we say cancel culture, but then there's the other part of it where people are like, is a one and done situation really the best approach? And like, you were saying, Luis, in regards to showing empathy in certain people's blind spots, right? And I don't know where I lie, so I guess I'm gonna just open up to the both of you, and anyone who goes, if you both go, you get to choose who want to go. In regards to, do you really think people or certain people in particular should be canceled?
That's so good. I appreciate how, before we started, you were like, I have some controversial perspectives about that. I stay being the one that's like, this isn't going to be popular, So, I think here's the problem with cancel culture for me personally. I think a lot of times inside of DEI work, or, you know, whatever people are calling it these days, there's Jedi and Ready and all that kind of stuff, right? But inside of doing diversity and inclusion work, people are quick to cut people off for not moving correctly in a place where we don't yet know how to move as a people. Otherwise, we wouldn't need DEI work, right? And so it's hard to engage and make the sell of, like, especially to white folks, to be like, hey, I need you to do this work with me. I need you to stop being racist. I need you to stop doing all of this harm. And then they're paralyzed by fear to engage in the work because they're like, I don't want to mess up, because cancel culture is real, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, I think there does have to be some real accountability around, like, you don't just get to be like, well, I'm learning, right? I've worked in organizations where, like, executive leaders refuse to, like, utilize the right pronouns, for instance, for months and years. And they're like, I'm learning. And so I think there's a real sweet spot between, like, I'm dedicated to learning and this is what it looks like. And then I'm stepping outside of that. I think it's really hard, though, when you're doing a mission of inclusion, to utilize tools of exclusion in order to, like, accept people in and cut people out of the mission. Because then I think there's, like, some real hypocrisy that we carry as we engage people in the work, right? And so I think it's dangerous for us to cancel people one and done. Now, there's a difference between, I was ignorant yesterday, I know that, y'all brought it to my attention, and I continue. Like, that's like the cancel club, right? And I think when people make honest mistakes, especially when you're talking about things they've said 10 years ago and they've evolved as humans, I think it's really dangerous to cut them off at the knees when really we need them walking with us in this work.
Good. Luis.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sarah is spot on. I would say I agree with everything that she articulated just so well right now. And I think the framing that I would add to this, and how I often present this to others when I engage in this dialogue, which, to be honest, I struggle with, and I continue to, like you, like, I have all kinds of inner controversies that I'm continuously wrestling with around this unfolding dialogue. But how I oftentimes frame it when I am engaging in public dialogue is that I believe what needs to be canceled are systems, not people. And I think separating the understanding that inherently what's behind sexist behavior, racist behavior, what's behind xenophobic, homophobic behavior is a legacy and a history of inherently hierarchical, colonizing, oppressive systems, right? That it is an entire history of systemic oppression that by definition is zero-sum game and hierarchical. So the little joke that I sometimes use is that by definition, these systems were designed to destroy themselves. Like, at one point, they're gonna be gone. That's just what they are. And that gives me some sense of peace, except for in the process of getting there, there's a lot of harm that happens, right? That's where the joke goes away very quickly. That's where it gets very real for me, and that's where I think it's difficult to name systems when you have in front of you is a friend or a colleague or a peer or a family member who is saying something, doing something, behaving in a way that's extremely not just insulting, might be a nice way of putting it. It's just straight up racist or straight up sexist or straight up xenophobic, and the imbalance of power that exists in spaces. The temptation, and I say this because I've engaged in this, is to want to remove yourself from that person, and in that particular case, that could be a form of canceling, as in, I'm going to cancel this person from being in my space as a friend, being in my space as an aunt or uncle, being in my space as a colleague. But then I think the challenge, and where cancel culture is now emerging for me in some more difficult spaces, is when you think about social media, and when you think about canceling people that you don't even know, or you don't even have a relationship with, and also who gets to cancel who, and like the imbalance of power of, do I really get to cancel my manager? Right? Do I have to make a compromise between, to follow Sarah's example, which I've run into, unfortunately as well. You have someone that maybe is really saying, I don't believe in pronouns. And that just happens to be where they're at for whatever reason. And yet you're somehow participating in some sort of the latest flavor of the month DEI activity, and yet you are, again, do you have the option as an employee to say, or as a student, right? If your professor is saying, I don't believe in pronouns, to say, I'm not going to take this class, I'm going to drop this class, or I'm not going to work here anymore. And I think there's a true imbalance of power there that makes it conflicting. So I know in my heart that I believe in not canceling people, but working towards canceling those systems and moving towards accountability. But I also understand that that's not where we are right now. And where I end up landing a lot of times, especially what I tell people who hold any identity that's systematically marginalized, is seek your safety and seek your wellness first. And from that place, decide what's best for you and how you show up in that space. Because we cannot keep asking people who hold these identities that are marginalized to do all the work. And we need to then have this conversation so that people that do hold some power can position themselves in a place of responsibility, accountability, and hopefully maybe even allyship, another buzzword that's out there, to really figure out like, okay, how do I work then on creating that space, balancing things a little bit so that we can have that conversation. And hint, most of the times that conversation is not going to be with someone like Sarah or myself. It's going to be with other people that hold privilege in some context, right? Like for me as a cisgender male, definitely lots of conversations I need to have with other cisgender males about accountability, right? But that's my initial take on it.
I struggle with it. And I struggle with it because, and I think for me, the reason I struggle with it, and this is not really like trying to put in like the oppression Olympics, but it's the idea as like a Black queer person who gets it on both sides and have to create a space and live in a space where we're both not, like we're just not really being seen, appreciated, and all of the things. So, everything that's come out, which I'm not sure if you all have heard and seen or follow, but I tend to, is, the little Boosies, the Kevin Harts, the now the Dave Chappelles, right? And so it's kind of like, how much longer do those who live in between the margins, right, have to deal with this crap? So, and I'm thinking about it as those who are just tired of really the bullshit, like, totally. And choosing to not, and I guess this is a different way too, is like choosing not to be in relationship with a person because of said thing or said behavior. And that's kind of where I am with it. Like, I personally believe that some people just need to be canceled because I don't feel like there's anything we can do for them besides canceling them as a form of a consequence for them to really go and think about their behavior. And that's kind of where I am. Like, I just think about it on the lines of like the whole Dave Chappelle. I still haven't seen it, but people are like, hey, you should watch it. And I'm like, it's interesting for straight cis people to tell someone who's a part of the LGBT community, you should watch it and watch it to the end. So you want me to watch something that is traumatizing in a joke that is not, like, why would I do that? Now, as a academic, as an activist, as someone who wants to engage in conversation, yeah, I'll probably, because that'll be my decision, because I
Right.
can handle it. But oh, you should watch it till the end. No, no, no. I don't have to do that, right?
Right.
Jokes are in this way in this way, these jokes in particular can be harmful, it can be traumatizing, it can do a lot. And to know that Black, and I'm specifically saying Black, Black LGBTQ folks
Mm.
are are already seen as a minority in a minority group in both group, like, you know, and it's like there's just no support. And even when we talk about the Black Lives Matter and things like that, where I'm like, we continuously keep talking about, from what we know, right? Black, straight, hetero, you know, cis folks, but there's nothing over here. So it's hard for me in that sense.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm working towards turning a new leaf for the one offense. Like,
right.
I'm getting to that point. And I'm trying to get into a place of how to be my authentic self, how to be honest about what has been said and done in inappropriate behavior. Because in my opinion, I feel as though that there has to be a consequence for inappropriate behavior. Because if there's no consequence, then the person feels like I can do whatever I want because there's no consequence. So for me, then moving the conversation is then, how does accountability culture really play into this? Yeah. Because I do believe in help, like giving a person a chance, and I'm working through this in therapy, is trust. You know, when systems don't support people of color and underrepresented people, like Luis, like it's like Luis was talking about, like it's hard to even trust a person to change when they're only contributing to the system. Like it's just, it's a little hard for me. But how does it, from your perspective, how does accountability culture then weave into your work, and or just your opinion about accountability culture? And any one of you can go in that. And I just want to say that because I just lie a little different of like where I am now and the identities that I hold.
Yeah. I appreciate that. First of all, you naming your positionality, because I do think it always is informing how we show up and perceive the world. And so when we're not willing to account for that, then it makes it harder, because now I'm just sharing facts and then people can dispute the facts instead of saying, like, in my position, which it impacts me differently than it impacts you, right? And so like you can choose to honor that or not, but I'm going to name it, right? Yeah. So I think that's important. I also think there's definitely, like what you were hitting on, Q, is like there's definitely this hierarchy of who is harmed and how much we care about it, right? And so like you mentioned Black Lives Matter, it's like LGBTQ plus, definitely towards the bottom, also Black women, right? So like when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about the men who are shot and killed, which obviously is really fucking problematic. And it's like, is it equally problematic when we are harmed, right? And so I think that's a really important point. I think, Luis, I loved everything you said. Also, you are dope and we are friends now, so welcome to that. I think one piece that I disagree about is that I think the system is built by a few people in a way that lines under two assumptions. One, that they could hold absolute power, and two, that they would never lose it. And so I think they built a system that is constantly perpetuating itself. And so there have been, like, you know, articles and speakers talking about how now we could remove white people out of the equation entirely. And we are so trained to perpetuate white supremacy that we would keep it going in the absence of whiteness, which is wild, right? So when you think about that, what does it mean to hold people accountable? I think back to, like, so I'm a single mom. I have 3 beautiful children. They're 12, 10, and 8. And one of the things I think about with accountability is, like, if I ever say to them, like, you guys are doing something you shouldn't be doing, and they're aware, it's easier to call them into action to say like, right, like we have this system, for instance, of like noise levels, okay? And it's like, y'all, what level are you at? And they'll be like, we're about a 3. Okay, so I'm on the phone. What level are you supposed to be at? A 1. Perfect. Can we do that? We don't have to have this big long conversation of like, I'm on the phone. This is what I need from you, because we've done that already.
Yeah.
But if I'm sitting on the phone and they're acting a fool, and then I say, what are you guys doing? And they're like, living life, then it's really hard to hold them accountable to something because I haven't set a standard. I think that's where cancel culture is like trying to grasp at straws of power and control, because there isn't a structure. And the people who are acting a fool are acting a fool in compliance with how the system works, right? And so we're allowed, when we have positions of power and privilege, to delineate ourselves from people who do not have the same power, and it's anticipated and expected, right? And so that's why it's such a detriment to communities when white violence wreaks havoc, and then we're like, what are y'all gonna do about it? And they look confused, right? Because it's like, we're gonna do what we're supposed to do, which is be loud when mom's on the phone, right? And so it's really important for us to first build structures and build cultures that say like, here's what we're not going to do anymore. And that's what I encounter most with organizations. They're like, what is the work, right? And I'm like, so the work is having conversations, yes, and that's a start. It's also like changing your perspectives and asking hard questions. And the most critical thing you can do is say, there will be time for growth, but like understand by like December of 2024, I'm not playing with you, right? And so you say it if you want to say it, but get it out now, because December 2024, like we are not playing anymore, right? And if you don't put timelines around that, then it's like, let's just be less racist, right? And so then we get into the like the bean picking and the bean counting of like, okay, Luis, you said 16 offensive things last week. Now you said 14. And instead, we're like cheering for you because you're making progress instead of acknowledging the impact of those 14 times, right? And so then the next week it's 12 and the next week it's 10, instead of saying it's not appropriate. But if you are in a situation where you're trying to hold people accountable to a structure that doesn't exist, that's where we feel powerless, right? And we're in spaces where we're like, I don't even know what to do with that, right? And we've all been in that space where someone says just something off the chain, and we're looking like, is anyone going to do anything? Because we're tired, right? We're exhausted. We don't have the sanity. I'm always checking in like, can I do this without burning the whole shit down? Can I? And the answer is often no. So then I have to sit there and be like, I don't have it today, right? Because the reality is, if I'm holding people accountable in a system that is not built for accountability, I pay for that, not anybody else. And so now we're talking about, I'm holding someone accountable for being racist or sexist or heterosexist or whatever that looks like. And then I'm the jerk because I'm bringing in accountability that doesn't exist in the space, right? And so I think there is a real delicate balance between like powerless entirely and able to take agency. And those things have been stolen from us over time for so long that I think people are like, what can I do? Like Luis said, like, at least I can cut them out of my life, right? And then you have an expectation of the community you're with to also cut them out, right? So I think it's challenging though when those people are also marginalized. And so now you're coming at their livelihood. Now you're coming at their reputation, right? And so I think it perpetuates itself because it's built to do that, right? Like it's now to a point where the people who created it can position themselves as the heroes that can rescue, because they don't even have to do the work of oppressing us anymore. We'll do it to ourselves, right? So now they can be like, oh, Q, why are you talking to Luis that way when they're the ones that started the shit, right? And that shit is wild. So I think it's really important about like building structures and cultures of accountability so that when someone's brave enough to say what you just said is problematic, that we already know what's going to happen next because we've set the structure to expect that.
That's a really, really, really good point. But I do got a follow up for you, but I want to let Luis go and chime in here for both of you though.
Yeah, I think I'll be brief by offering what I think is a personal tool that has served me in navigating this complexity, because I have no interest in watching Dave Chappelle's latest. I just don't want to watch it. I can read about it, and I've heard plenty about it, and that's all I need to do with it. And I know that because, to me, I have a fundamental understanding that I sincerely have no interest in putting myself through that. Like, I know it's harmed people I love. I know it's harmed. Now, it harms what I believe is fundamental in my belief in humanity. And at the same time, I cannot tell you how many times I've had to talk about it. Now being another time that I have to engage with it, because it exists, it is real. This is out there, and it is actually my responsibility to talk about it. I cannot pretend it doesn't exist, because it's very real. And I think I want to complicate for myself, right, just here with you in this moment, what canceling means versus accountability, and the layers around it. Because I think of it at sort of bringing this model of thinking about like self, relationship, community, society, right? And these structures that Sarah's speaking of, which I agree with, I think exist at all of those different levels. The reality is that I believe overall, we lack even structures to approach our own selves, right? Because that is how oppression works. It removes you from self. It dehumanizes you to the point that you cannot even acknowledge your own humanity, right? So for me, that experience comes from being undocumented in this country. And it took me the longest time to understand that that's a social condition, not an identity, but it was designed fundamentally to make me believe in my illegality. And it is the closest I'll probably ever get to understanding what it feels like to be a Black person in this country. And my historical understanding is that I'm not even close. My experiential understanding in opening my heart and my to witnessing and listening to stories is that I'm not even close to understanding what that oppression feels like. And yet I feel it on my body, right? Like I feel this harm in my body. And at that level of self, like it took me so long to tell my mom, we need to talk about how we talk about Black people. It took me the longest time to have that conversation with my dad. It took me the longest time to have that conversation with myself. And part of what was happening is that an odd way of self-canceling was happening. Like I'm canceling the part of myself that wants to acknowledge the humanity of Black people, that wants to acknowledge the humanity of queer people. I'm bisexual. I was like ignoring a part of myself for my family who are white presenting. And I'm like the one brown person sometimes in these family gatherings. Like I was just canceling my own brownness. So we don't even have those structures for even understanding accountability in the context of loving ourselves. Like we are accountable to ourselves as in we come to this world with an inherent ability to radically love ourselves. And if we don't do that, then we are already calling ourselves apart from ourselves. Those, like if we don't even know how to love ourselves, how are we going to love other people? Now, let's not even get into, like, this is me inviting you into the deeps of my own intimate inner struggles with self-canceling, right? I was just doing some writing about this poem, and Quinton, you've heard me talk about it in Lakesh, you're my other me, and it's based on this Mayan precept about reciprocity. And I was just writing about the first time I encountered the poem. And what I remember about, this was in 2011, and I was working at a summer camp with a group of high school students, mostly Latinx, mostly bilingual. We're reading this poem, and this poem, it's English and Spanish, and weaves it together beautifully. And to me, these two worlds that are always, in some ways, in my experience as an immigrant, have been at odds with each other, suddenly made sense. And I had never encountered a space with these two pieces of me that are supposed to be controversial, opposite, denying each other, could actually be with each other lovingly, in reciprocity. And I remember also thinking, this was in 2011, the year before, that poem had been banned, had been canceled from public schools in Arizona because of the ethnic studies ban. So it's like, I'm like that poem, right? Like it's like we've been politically and socially canceled. And I know what canceling feels like at that level. And from there on, just the moving into thinking about what is the structures that I need in my relationships to move from that deficit-based place that is not inherently within me, but that was imposed upon me and my ancestors and my and currently it's happening as we're talking. And let's not even talk about like structures in terms of organizations, in terms of community. So like for me, that layering those things has helped me to make sense of how do I move in the world. And there are times when I know it makes no sense for me to participate in something because I will no longer harm myself because that will perpetuate harm upon others. I just know that. But I don't think that's canceling. I think that's accountability. And do I get it always right? No, I don't. And that's why I need accountability, because when I don't get it right, I either need to find a space where like I come across that on my own, but most likely I need a space with friends, with colleagues who I know are with me to do this work, because I do think it's collective eventually what we need in order to navigate this.
This is such a good conversation. I just want to let you know, both of you know, like you are opening my mind in a different way. Because the one thing I do want to recognize, because if people know me, I'm very honest and blunt. If you have not known that,
welcome.
Welcome to
yep.
you. Is I know that it just kind of go back to what I said earlier. It's like I'm really working through therapy, like really, really hard with trying to really pull out the empathy part in a way to give a person another chance of any kind of relationship. And it's and even in this case, it's even hard in my everyday work, because it's just a lot of things that I haven't healed from, things that I'm, just trying to unpack. And so I'm doing my best I've gotten a lot better. Parfait will tell you, but you are definitely doing the work, because I'm telling you, when I first started, I wanted to punch everybody in the face. And those are just facts. I'm like, you got, all right, you about to get it. I'm gonna catch you at the parking lot. And those are just facts. Like, I grew up in West Philly, so like it's on site. That's just how it rolls. And so I just was that, and I've gotten a lot better, but it's just been rough trying to find that empathy part. Is and I'm doing better at it, but I also know that I'm very angry. I don't apologize for that. I know that I'm working through that anger in a productive way, even if that means speaking my truth and getting it out, poetry, those type of things. But I do know I have work to do. I just want to stay true to me and do the work to get to where I need to go to really start letting people in, because there's people here in my job that I'm like, child, like, I don't have time for that. My supervisor probably knows who some of those people are, but he ain't crazy. He knows.
He's got a little list.
he know. I'm like, no, I'm not. No, he be helping me though. He'd be like, come on. I'm not ready. But I'm really trying to do better. But I can just say for me right now, I'm still in my angry phase.
Yeah.
I'm still in my healing phase. I'm still working through trauma. But still trying to work on me every day to do a little bit more better. And I've gotten a lot better. Like I said before, I'm telling you, I was just throwing balls, elbows, everything. And just listening to the both of you is an honor because this has helped me in a lot of my thinking. But I want to really bring up a conversation that I had a podcast episode for when we talk about accountability and talk about community, solidarity, and all of those things. What happened, like going back to your point, for both of your points, like how do we get all of our POC to be on the same page when some of them contribute to the pain?
Look.
And that's, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
And I'm like, and I can hear both of you, and I'm like, I'm so for it because I'm here on campus trying to do that. But then I see people that understandably, in a sense of fear of losing jobs and stuff, I get that.
Yeah.
But it feels like everyone's on a different level of activism. Some, are comfortable. Like, I just don't know where people lie in that. And part of me sitting back, I'm like, you're contributing to the, like, but I also know that you're trying to not lose your job. Because we're at will, us exempt people. And then some of them that's just right out there, like, okay, like, I don't fuck with y'all. That's not what I'm on. Y'all just complaining. Like, we got those people in the system, right? I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, I mean, I would love both of your perspective on that, because if we're talking about canceling and accountability, I mean, we cancel our own POC folk.
Yep.
How do we hold them accountable? Like, it's a tricky thing for me, especially working in education.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. I appreciate your question. And I also want to say something about what you were sharing. First of all, both of you, and the vulnerability, I really treasure that, like, because that's never a gift to be taken lightly, right? So I appreciate that. I think also, Q, if I ever asked you to do anything for me, it would be to challenge your language around how you continue to grow and evolve, and that you keep saying, like, you're doing better. And I don't think responding to rage with violence based on how we're socialized to survive it is a reflection of doing poorly. I think it's just a reality. And so if you want to shift and change your reality, fantastic. And when you say you're doing better, like, whose standards are those, right? Is it because you no longer offend the white folks who offend you, right? Like, and I think, and I say that because I'm regularly in spaces where people use that same kind of language of, like, you can get to the next level, you can rise, you can do the thing, right? And I'm like, but is that an objective of mine, right? And so I think, and no disrespect for Parfait, I love me some Parfait, and Parfait also knows, like, my philosophy and his philosophy are different.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, light that shit on fire. He's like, so real quick, Sarah, And so I think it's important, like, the key point of what you shared of, like, how do I stay myself in it? I think that's a huge part of the answer to your question, which is, like, I think all of us are going to carry the work different. I think all of us are going to understand the work different. Part of the challenge is that we have been socialized from the age of 5 to perpetuate white supremacy. Before that too. But if you think about, we are legally obligated to put our children into school, right? We have to, otherwise we can go to jail, right? And so inside of school structure, for the first 2 years of kids' lives, they are still forming neural pathways around how they understand right and wrong. and we're sending them into this environment where 78% of their teachers are Black or are white, they are perpetuating the standards of behavior. Kindergarten's really about play some games and learn how to fall in line, right? Then you get to first grade and you start learning some of the things that apply to life, like basic math and things like that. But also what they're learning is who's smart and who's not. And intelligence is merely a mirror of whether or not I can reflect back to the person teaching me that I share their values, right? It's not about like, oh, I'm quick with math, I'm good at around the world. Sure, that's a metric. And what it's actually about is if my teacher looks at me and says, Sarah, I need you to do the thing. And then my response is conducive to their values. So we have 78% of an educational system that we are legally obligated to put our kids into, mirroring back to whiteness. Yeah. And so by the time we get to a point where it's like, yeah, you know, I'm in a PhD program and I'm like, cool. If I haven't thought about how socialized I am, I can be the wokest Black person there doing harm and white supremacy all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's first, how do we create space, not that's comfortable, but that's safe, where there is literally some tangible action for people who do harm. It's hard, right? In the context of like the three of us are having a conversation, I say something harmful, we'll wait till the end, we pull me aside, we whisper, don't talk to Luis that way, but Luis doesn't know I'm being held accountable. So what Luis learned in this dynamic is Sarah can say whatever the fuck she wants to. Yeah. And if she harms me, it doesn't really matter. Instead of stopping everything to say, Sarah, what you just did is not okay. Like we can talk about consequences later, but I just want to acknowledge you're harming people right now. Full stop, harming. So now we're going to have a conversation. Let's keep learning math or whatever, but like we need to talk about what does it look like and interrupt it. We're so trained though to perpetuate white supremacy that, like you said, we do it to ourselves. I mean, it reflects what Luis was saying about like the self-love part. We're programmed like, don't even like yourself, actually hate yourself and buy a bunch of shit to try to like yourself that is designed to fail. So you keep buying it, right? Yes. So all of these structures, we're navigating this whole entire structure doing exactly what we're supposed to do, which is like, just obey and be like, what now? Oh, a new sparkling water? Sounds good. And it's like, we're chasing the very thing that we're running away from, which is this like real inner peace of understanding we're walking in purpose, right? Yes. And so I think that's what it's really about. You know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's the most widely accepted framework of how people move through motivation. And there's some challenges with it. Sure, absolutely. And fundamentally, it suggests that like when you build each level of need and meet each level of need, then you're able to access the next level, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things is most people are familiar with the 5 levels, not the 6. Before he died, like a year before he died, he actually was like, I think I missed something and added a 6th level. And that is self-transcendence, okay? So what it means is like you're meeting basic needs, food, shelter, water. Then you go into safety needs. Am I like secure and am I safe? Then you go into belonging. Do I have connections with others? Then you go into esteem, which is like, do I feel good about myself? And do I think you guys feel good about me, right? Mm-hmm. Then you go into self-actualization, which is me being my best self. If you think about our society and thinking about what our purpose is, we're often programmed to think that's when you arrive. Mm-hmm. When I'm like, I am being my best self, I have these degrees, I have these achievements, get it, right? And I've arrived. But what he missed is that it's actually about getting over yourself, becoming your best self, getting over yourself, and doing 3 key things. 1, dedicating your life to a single cause. 2, doing a cause that actually serves the greater good. And 3, being connected to the divine. And when that happens, then we actually set ourselves free. I think part of the problem is, as a society, we're so individually driven that now I'm sitting here, when Luis does harm to me, I'm like, okay, well, is he gonna hate me? What about me? What about me? What about me? And so now I'm creating an environment where you learn you also might be harmed. So now the 3 of us continue to operate as these individuals instead of saying, how do we take care of each other in this space? And I'm not gonna be nice to you, but I will be kind. Yeah. And sometimes kindness is like, Q, you're fucking up, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes kindness is like, back up off of cue before I cut you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes kindness looks like, I need to pull you to the side and let you know you got to do better.
Yeah.
But I think, especially in the Pacific Northwest, we have to stop being nice and we have to start being kind and really set some structures around. It isn't about us. It's about how we serve the collective, right? Like that's how we liberate humanity, by actually serving humanity above ourselves.
Mm. Luis, did you want to chime in?
I'm finger snapping over here. Yeah, I mean, a few things that resonated with me as I was thinking about your question, because honestly, as you posed the question, my first honest answer was like, I have no idea, because I'm trying to figure that out. The other day I was spending some time with a really good friend, someone that after only knowing for a year and a half, I'm blessed to call a really good friend. And he led me to the realization that liberation healing is a multi-generational project. In the way just he framed it through his own story, through his own narrative. And I think part of my answer is to not think too much about the answer, but think more about like my role at the moment and what does that mean. And so I think like I'm trying to position myself in the longer arc of history, compared to how impulsive I used to feel when I was younger and how blinded I was sometimes by urgency to just march or and I did march and I will march when I feel like I have to, not to say that I cannot still feel like I have to do that. But I feel like at this moment I'm feeling very reflective. I think it's just a space you created for us, Quinton, and for that I'm very grateful. And I think like part of it was like I have no idea like what does it actually look like, but like the things that I do know because of lived experience and because I felt them and they felt true to me. And Sarah mentioned a couple of them. I think the first one that came to mind honestly is a space. Like and space as in physical space, but also emotional space and spiritual space. And honestly, like I'm gonna go back to that poem, and I'm gonna go back to the place where I experienced that poem. At this point in my journey, I had been so caught up on, honestly, the way I frame it now is making up, really trying to create a narrative, the dreamer narrative, right? Of just saying, hey, look at me, I'm thriving, I'm succeeding, I fit in your meritocratic, individualistic, white framework. I deserve a pathway to become part of your we. But my mom doesn't, the farm worker doesn't, and the kid who couldn't graduate of high school because of your inequitable system doesn't. But I somehow made it through the course, through the challenge course. So choose me. And that's pretty much the story me and thousands of others, young immigrant people were telling. And there was, and I wanna be clear that there was a dignity in telling that story, as in we were still owning part of our narrative, but it was still in this larger framework that was not for us. And what no one ever gave me is a space to question, why is it that I feel so shitty after I tell that story, even though it feels like that's the only story that will give me and my mom and my family a little bit of possibility or opportunity. Like something just felt extremely messed up about it, to the point that I struggle with self-depression, like suicide ideation, like all these kinds of things. But you cannot name that because you're supposed to be perfect.
Yeah.
When you're trying to embody and fitting within that whitewash narrative of who you're supposed to be. So when I arrive at this camp, La Cima, first of all, to me, super important to understand that I really believe that, no mistake, and this is connected to the divine, but for me, the divine is nature. And having space outside, having space in nature, right? And in a retreat space being with other people, connected again, going back to some of the things that Sarah said, like 90% of our staff in that specific place were not just educators, but they were educators of color with a pedagogical practice grounded on an understanding that collective liberation is the way, right? So it's not just put more educators of color in front of our kids, is what is our practice as educators, right? How are we not perpetuating harm? Because like the Dreamer thing, right? Like we perpetuated that thing ourselves. And because of it, to this day, we are struggling within our immigration movement to truly form a collective understanding of how do we, fully ask for dignity in the larger context of immigration. So, the other topic, I will not get too much into it, but to me it goes back to space. And it wasn't until I had that space to be with people who had a practice grounded on collective liberation, where I had an opportunity to breathe, like literally breathe and be able to look up and see the sky and feel connected and hear trees and hear the river. And like, there's just something natural in all of us that recognizes nature. And we are removed from it. So for me, it's not to say that there's no ways of bringing that to urban settings, but for me, my experience was the first time I experienced that type of space was there. And since then, really, I mean, this was over a decade ago, I've been seeking to figure out what is my role in creating similar spaces for myself, for my relationships, for my community, and for society, right? Like I go back to all of those, and I don't have complete answers for any of them. I know what I know thus far because there are some things that have worked for me. There are some things that have not worked for me. And honestly, and this is for me just the third piece, which again, connecting back to something Sarah mentioned, right? Like self-transcendence. For me, that's going back to reciprocity. That's what self-transcendence means to me. It's the understanding, right? Like James Baldwin said it, we belong with each other, right? Like that's the bottom line reality. It's Ubuntu, I am because you are, right? It's Ntlokenawake, it's sacred interconnectedness, it's the Lakota prayer, Mitakuya Oyasin, like we're all related. Like that's just, like we are part of each other, period. And that's why I think the counseling and accountability conversation, it's messy and complex because the underlying truth that I fundamentally believe in is that interconnectedness exists, right? It just is. But on top of it, there's been so much harm, so much genocide, so much violence, so much system and structure that is not, I mean, Sarah just beautifully, and at the same time hauntingly, right, for anyone that's listening that's a parent, or in my case, like I'm thinking about my nephew and nieces, like, yeah, like I know that this is what's happening, and it's society, and you're like, well, what do I do, right? Like, so it can feel so defeating in some ways because you just articulated so well, Sarah. Like honestly, like that was powerful and haunting, right? Like because it is a reality. So it's what do you do there? And that's the part of me that sometimes is like, okay, take it one piece at a time, because otherwise I start getting a little I start spinning a little too much. So I'll go back to like, honestly, humbly, like I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what is that space and what does it look like for us to access those spaces, co-create those spaces, to find that reciprocity. And honestly, at the end of all of it, if there are times when I'm like, no, I need to walk away from that, then I will. But I will still insist that to me, that's not canceling something. That's accountability. It's like, you don't get me. And that's how I hold you accountable. I will not participate in that.
Listen, you have no, and I've said, listen, oh, you're saying something I've said in many times where I'm like, if the consequence is you will not have access to me. And I mean like none. One thing I want to ask the question, there's two things, right? So the first question I want to ask is and I'm asking this because someone brought it up that I can't remember who I was listening to, and really changed my perspective about my activism. Does solidarity require us to actually be in community? Given what we know about
Right.
what we just really talked about.
That's so good. And, like I mentioned, I'm in school right now, which it has been so fascinating. And one of the things, this is another place where I'm like, this is controversial. Here we go. I think community is inherently exclusionary because community is based on commonality, right? And I think where we as people weaponize commonality, like Luis was talking about, we have all of these like interconnectedness, right? And I think in the searching for community and connection, oftentimes we'll say, oh, me and Luis don't work at SPSCC, we're family. And now you're like, oh man, right? And it just continues to go in that way. And it's really well intended because me and Luis are seeking like a way to like really support each other. And inherently we exclude you. I think the other part of solidarity specifically. So I used to sign my emails in solidarity all the time. That was like my little, like part of my little signature. And there was this article I had to read as a part of my admissions process into the program that I'm in. And it talked about the difference between like social movement leadership and leadership from a traditional perspective inside of a hierarchy. And one of the things it talked about is the language that we use in places where the expectation is that everyone falls in line and like fits the paradigm of whatever that looks like. And they listed off some things, and one of those things were solidarity. And I was beside myself, right? Because I'm like, in solidarity, friends, like, let's get it. And I was like, I have never thought about the fact that we have to lose part of ourselves in order to fit in to the cookie cutter of how solidarity in our current structure operates, right? Because we have to say, okay, like I am way different than you, but let's focus on how we're the same, right? And that's minimization. Instead of saying like, despite my differences, I still honor you. You're having a human experience and so am I. And like we can walk together in that, whether we have things in common or not, right? Because there are places where we can build real connection. And so I think solidarity is often weaponized as a way to like whitewash ourselves into spaces where we're like, ooh, no, me too, right? Like I fit in too. And we sacrifice a part of ourselves to do that.
Yep.
And so I think there is a factor of solidarity that exists in community, which reinforces exclusion. So what does it look like then to build real connection and real open space? And I think the real powerful piece is that other people can opt out of that community, not me making the choice for you, right? So if I'm like, I have a club, it's brown hair only, and people are like, damn, I was born with blonde hair, I can't help it, right? But if I'm like, here's a club, we talk about a bunch of stuff, anyone is welcome. But some of the things we talk about is like how to wash your brown hair, how to, condition your brown hair. Then blonde people might be like, why do I want to do that, right? I'm on the board at YMCA, and we regularly talk about what does it mean to like really be inclusive of everyone. And there's a certain point where you're like, I'm going to boil it down to a very simple example. If we're a fitness facility, which the YMCA is so much more than that, but if we're a fitness facility and you, Q, are like, I have zero interest in being in any kind of fitness whatsoever, right? Then we can break our backs to be like, but Q is still not a member. But that part is like, we're integral in fitness. We have made our mission very clear. We welcome you. You can come sit in our lobby and not work out. But like, if you don't want to be here, you get to choose that. We're doing real diligence though, to say, if you come, it's been designed with you in mind. And because of the mission of the work, because of our specific section of serving humanity, you might never want it, right?
Yeah.
But right now, how it works is I'm like, so if you can afford a certain level of membership, if you want to swim, if you like all of these things, and we get really specific, right? Because we're trying to fit a niche, and we lose it because we inherently exclude a lot of people. And so I think the principle and the fruit of solidarity is beautiful. I think the fruit of community is beautiful. And how we as humans exercise community, it's inherently harmful because we exclude people by saying these specific people belong.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's I've been using it in a way, I guess I've been using it in a way of just because all people of color won't take me as I am, doesn't mean I stop the mission. Because even though we may not get along and that's cool, I'm still fighting for us anyway. And so I'm like, solidarity does not require for me and this person to really be in community with each other. You can be over there, I can be over here. Because maybe in this life and time we're not meant to be in relationship. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna stop fighting for you, right? And that's where I'm trying to transcend to that, because at first I'm like, fuck that bitch.
Right.
Like, bitch, get you what? Did you say?
Yes. Say something else. Say something else.
What? Honey, listen, the hood will come straight out. But
and that's the thing, right? I think it's like that technically what you're talking about is not solidarity, right? Because it's literally being like, we're going to this place at this time, and if you don't want to go at this place and this time, that's not solidarity. I think the spirit of solidarity is that, to say like, look, white folks, as much as I offend you, you should love the shit out of me because I'm trying to free us all, And what you don't understand is white supremacy is a pyramid scheme. And so white supremacy was actually designed to keep y'all out of the elite white spaces. And now you're fighting tooth and nail for white supremacy because you think it's about me, but it's not even about me, right? And so I think there's some real like inherent affinity that should exist in those spaces. But I think solidarity often cancels it out because we're busy making sure we fit the bill. So we make it clear for the people who don't.
Louise?
What I love so much about our conversation is that we are complicating the definitions and understandings around it. Certainly for me, this dialogue has done it, so I will not impose that on anyone else. But if anyone is listening and feeling like, I had never thought about community that way, or solidarity that way, or accountability or counseling that way. Like there's so many, we're complicating these words, and I'm glad that we're doing that, because I think that's part of the work that we need to be doing, is to really sit down and process what does this mean, right? Like earlier, like I mentioned, allyship, like we need to complicate what that means, right? Like solidarity now as people are saying like, well, we're accomplices. And it's like, well, yeah, like we need to complicate that too, right? Like what does that mean? And the meaning piece should be intersectional, should be contextual, should be grounded on history, should be situational, should be grounded on what is needed in any and every context across different spaces and times, right? And I think, I don't know, here's my what's coming up for me right now. I read a couple of months ago a book that I had been avoiding on purpose because I knew I was going to bring up shit, and but I knew I had to read it. Right, this is way the opposite of Dave Chappelle. Way the opposite. The book's called The Undocumented Americans, and it's by Carla Cornejo Villavencio, and she's dope. I mean, and I just knew it. Like I had read reviews, I had followed her work for a long time. And when her book came out, I was like, that book is gonna haunt me. But it probably also holds all kinds of healing and medicine that I need. I don't know her personally. We've never crossed paths. We've never exchanged an email, anything. Am I in community with her? Am I in relationship with her? I think so. I don't know if she thinks so. Just because both of us are undocumented, does that mean we're in community? Are we in solidarity with each other? Are her thoughts that challenge so much of what I was articulating earlier in terms of what it means to be a dreamer, and who's worthy, right? Who's deserving of access to the American dream? I mean, she just is a brilliant writer, and it's a book that needs to be read. But to be honest, like when I read it, like it really complicated my feelings about solidarity, in the context of just what I think of as my, I hesitate to say first because I don't want to put this in a hierarchy, but it's difficult. Like I've lived most of my life as an undocumented person in this country. It's difficult to not hear the word undocumented and right away be like, okay, where are my people? Because that's just the most consequential lived experience that I have. And yet, in the book, I'm like realizing like, hey, like you talk about like how your like signature line is in solidarity, mine is in community, because I'm continuously trying to figure out what the hell does that mean? Like, how can I be in community with people? It's almost like it should be in community ? Like I'm asking myself that question. Like, how can I be in community with you? Because I believe that is a given, but yet somehow we've made it so difficult for us to be with each other. So therefore, like, how can I even attempt solidarity when I'm working to attempt, and I do attempt it and I work at it, but to me, again, like it's complicating these things, and again, I don't know that I have an answer, but to me, I would say it's what brings you the most healing and justice at any given moment. And sometimes that healing and justice is going to be you removing yourself, and other times it's going to be leaning in, and there's no one answer, and because that's going to feel very different each time, and just as I knew there was a moment when I was like, I'm not going to read that book right before the 2020 election. We'll see what happens at the 2020 election, and then I might read the book, and then and I'm glad I did that, because I was not ready to do that. So again, like it's just that checking in with self has served me well.
This is the last question, and I'm shifting gears as we close. I'm going to propose something that was a conversation that I want to get y'all's intake, and it's really specifically within higher ed, but particularly kind of going back to talking a little bit more so about faculty in particular, and would love to hear your perspective. So is it okay to tell students in general, or underrepresented students, certain faculty to take when we know there's certain faculty that can be harmful, aren't interested in changing their curriculum? One, is it okay to do that? And two, how do we even hold, is that the only way to hold faculty accountable? Because there's this unwritten spoken rule of, oh, don't tell students to do that, like everybody is learning, right? Trying to do better, right? Trying to grow, right? But we constantly get the same type of feedback, right? When I'm talking about like my Ignite and Black Scholar students, right? Where they're like, oh, the same faculty come up, right? But then there's like, oh, we can't do that. So we want our underrepresented students in particular to be traumatized and uncomfortable. And we kind of have to go, like, one, is it okay to tell our students in particular? And then how do we hold the faculty accountable? And is faculty at this point really moving in the direction, I hate to say cancel, or canceling themselves out, right? Because people can do that. And the reason is because I know we've all worked with students, and we have this connection to education, and this is the next generation, right? What are your thoughts on that as we close?
I think we are obligated to let students know who has a history of harming and who has a history of safety. And I think we're obligated to do that in such a bold way that we hold the institutions we work in accountable to doing something about it. For instance, if you know every single time I send a student in distress to Q's office and they leave worse off, at some point I'm going to have to stop sending them to your office.
Yeah.
And we need to have a bigger conversation about, we all know Q does harm. Why are we even talking about this, right? So if you would like me to stop telling people to go to Luis instead of Q, then I need you to address the fact that Q does harm on a regular basis. If you have no tangible plan for that, then I have no desire or willingness to stop sending them to Luis instead. And so I think what needs to happen is that people who have achieved a level of power, most likely to find a level of protection for themselves, they are obligated, once they achieve that level of power, to utilize that power. I think what often happens is we're like, we have a terrible experience as a student. We're like, screw that. We become an administrator. But then the proximity to power is so alluring that now we're like, I'm scared now. Like you talked about earlier, you have colleagues who are worried about losing their jobs. I hear you. And where does the impact lie greatest, right? So like, what does it look like for us to turn everything on its head and say, number one, strange concept, but students are the most important thing at a college, right? And then to act as if, right? So that if we have faculty who are known for harming people, we need to have serious conversations and development plans and associated accountability, just like we do when I go into a room and I make white people uncomfortable because I say something like racism is real. That needs to exist at the same level, if not greater, right? Because otherwise what we're doing is perpetuating harm and saying, we know Q is really harmful. And, he's been here 20 years or he's, insert the excuse there. And so otherwise, if we aren't willing to prioritize student safety, we should stop serving students. Let's be honest, because otherwise, like, what are we bringing them in for? We're saying this degree is necessary for you to access livelihood and you will suffer in order to get it. Like, come on. Otherwise, the other thing we can do is bring in faculty who are equally harmful to other demographics, like hire a Sarah Lloyd who's like, listen, white people, I'm a broker in white discomfort. Come sign up for my class. And I will teach, Core 100 or whatever it's called. And all the white folks can get assigned to my class and they can be offended too. But like, that seems outrageous because we would never hold white people accountable like that. So we have to really hold accountable the white violence that permeates throughout our experiences. I think the other piece that's critical is that we have to start disaggregating data and having real conversations about what it means. Because what often happens is you have that faculty member who's been here for like 300 years. Their overall surveys are strong, but their real impact is specific to students of color, for instance, or to first generation students, or to LGBTQ students. And we're not having that conversation because they might be like 75% approval rate. And it might be 0% approval rate with any systemically marginalized population. And so unless we're really disaggregating data to say, what does it actually mean? Like when you say people are fine, who is fine? I want to know specifically who is fine, so that we can have real conversations about accountability. Because otherwise what happens is we just say, 51% or more and we're good to go. And we don't talk about who those 49% are. And it's really harmful because we are raising the next generation of leaders as we move through it. It is not complicated. It is simple as hell. It's just not easy because we're going to have to make hard choices. It's going to be Yolanda who, delivered your baby in the back of your Forerunner. And if she does harm, that needs to matter. So I think the first step for all of us is to say, like, what are the motivations of our actions? And really dig deep into that. Both of you have normalized mental health and counseling in this. And I think that's so important. I know in therapy for myself, I had a therapist who once made me go through everything I like and figure out why. And it was exhausting, but there was real trauma at the root of some of those things, right? My favorite color, my favorite food, etc. And so I think we have to do that kind of diligence around, what do we know to be true? Is something harmful? Why is it harmful? Ask yourself the 5 whys. When you get to that core piece, it's probably white supremacy or patriarchy or heteronormativity, and so like really holding ourselves accountable to being like, when I move in this world and when I watch other people move, I'm willing to dissect why we're doing that so we can get to the root of it. Because if we don't do that, then basically what we're telling people, and we need to start being really honest in our recruitment materials, is like, you aren't safe here. So choose, again, that model of like, you choose your community, but just so you know, if you're Black or brown, if you're undocumented, if you're LGBTQ+, if you're a female, right? Like any of those things, if you have no resources, just know you're going to be offended on the regular basis, and we're okay with that. And if they're not willing to put it in writing, then they shouldn't be carrying it out in action.
I don't got nothing to say. Louise, bring us home, my brother.
You're clutching the pearls and everything. You're like,
honey,
yeah, I think I don't believe I'd be worthy of calling myself an educator if I did not fundamentally believe that first and foremost, our responsibility is to create a space of nourishment for our students so that they can flourish. And their flourishing is their own, right? Like, it's not our job for them to flourish. Like, we create a space where they can be nourished. And so it's like, to me, it's absolutely stop the harm, right? If you know harm is happening, it is your responsibility to stop it, period. There's no way around that. And that's the hypocrisy, right, of our systems, of education, of all of our systems. I know we're very focused on thinking about higher ed right now and just education at large, but I have a very difficult time thinking about any mainstream system that is grounded on a principle of nourishment and reciprocity and care and some of the other important principles we've named today. And I think So first, definitely stop the harm, and I hold myself accountable to that in any space that I operate in, and that's it. Period. And again, complicating the dialogue about what does it look like to navigate this world and to navigate these systems and to operate in these systems. The reality, and again, I'm so appreciating this because it's the way you, Quinton, and you, Sarah, have articulated some things. I'm going through. I'm at that self level today, right? I'm like, real quick, just want to be at the organizational level. If that's you hold that power. You know this is happening. Stop it. That's it. You have the power to do it. Just do it. But you all have gotten me drawn into this personal place, and the reality is that if I had come across a flyer that said, "Come to University of Washington, we will traumatize you, we will hurt you, you will go through hell, but you will get a diploma," I would have still gone. And that's the honest truth. And the reality is because I just knew, I understand my positionality in this world, and I don't accept it, but I understand it. And maybe I'm saying that now, hindsight. But I went through all of that, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. And at the same time, I know what I've been able to do for community, and it just hurts me so much that I had to suffer to be able to bring some joy and dignity to my mom. That's not okay. That's just not okay. It hurts me to know that I have friends and family that have gone through hurt because we're trying to fix what's broken, and that we have to go inside those systems that are broken and break ourselves in the process to try to fix them. it's just,
Yeah.
like, I don't have words for it. Like, it's just, I'm like really in my body right now, feeling these things. And that's the piece that to me gets so messy, because there are days where I dream of just like going and getting lost in some forest, and just being like, you know what, like, I'm done doing those trainings, I'm done doing those speeches, I'm done doing that writing, because it feels yet somehow connected in the most broken way to these systems that I'm trying to really remove myself from. And yet somehow, like, there's always that part of me that comes back and is like, lean in, believe, hope. And right now in my body, like, I'm just like, honestly, like, I'm not there. But I have to be there to be able to, like, tomorrow, you know, as I'm thinking about my responsibility, showing up in spaces, working with young people, you know, how do I process these so when I show up with them, I can be caring, right? And I can create the caring space that we need. So that's, yeah, you know, that's how that sits with me right now.
I appreciate that too, Luis, because there's this Indigenous framework for decision making, where there are like 4 or 5 questions that are asked. So, like, say you come up with a brilliant idea and you're like, we should do this thing. You go through all these questions, and the last question is it good for the children? And if the answer is no, then it's thrown out. It doesn't matter how much money it could make. It doesn't matter the impact, any of that, if it's not good for the children. And I think part of how we can move forward, I mean, granted, if we're talking about the college system, many of the students who are coming into the space aren't necessarily traditional students, and they're not kids, right? Like, developmentally, they might be children, but they've lived whole entire lives often. And so, but if we centered their interests and their well-being and stewarded the 7 generations in a real way to say, like, 3 generations came before me, I'm standing here now, and 3 will follow.
Yes.
And I feel the weight of that as I make decisions. I think that is how we create that kind of hopefulness, because it's like, we refuse to do harm starting now, right?
Yeah.
I think the other piece is that when we tell ourselves, this isn't, like, I appreciate the language you use, Luis, about this is a multi-generational work to do, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's so different to hold it in that space than to say, you know, I'm never going to see the change in my lifetime, which is regularly the rhetoric around this work. And inherently, I think it deflates the bubble, right? Because you're like, okay, well, get to suffering, and you're never going to see it pay off, right? It's like going to the gym every day, but you're not going to lose a pound. You're not going to gain an ounce of muscle. You're just going to work out and then one day die. It's like, why am I doing this? I'd rather eat donuts and chill, you know? And so it's like, yes, it's a multi-generational problem that we're solving, and we will see progress, right? Like, we will see progress tomorrow. I think it gives us the hope and the drive to keep moving forward, knowing that change is just around the corner, instead of change will exist for, like, my great grandbabies, right? And that exigency, not urgency, I think is so critical to keep us moving forward. So I'm grateful for both of you. Y'all are dope, seriously, and your vulnerability and your realness and your wisdom is such a treasure. So again, Q, thank you so much for having me. Luis, you're my new bestie, so welcome.
No, Luis is amazing. I got to hear Luis speak at a conference and was like, wow.
Yeah, you're
to
dope.
Be that just all the things. Like, he, you know, he was like all the things for me as a person of color, man of color, to stand and really do the work in a way where you can just see how grounded he is in it, right? In his work, in his calling. And it was powerful. And I'm like, I need to meet that person. You know what I mean? I want to be connected to that person. And I say that to tell you, Luis, like, you made a huge impact on me, just speaking at it was a faculty and staff of color conference. And I was just like, wow, he's amazing, you know. getting me into a place of healing, right?
Yeah.
Into a place of reflection. And yeah, just super dope.
Well, I'll just briefly say thank you for the gift of this space. There's nothing like talking about space earlier, right? I mean, this is the space I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So I felt challenged, I've struggled, and I felt growth, and I felt affirmed in the space. And when you can have all of those spaces and safe, right? I should definitely say that, because there was a relationship that connected me to the space, which is you, Quinton, and this connection that I feel to your work, the respect that I have for your work, and then now being also in the glow of Sarah and her brilliance, and not just incredible eloquence, but just deep thinking that again challenges me, is just a gift. So thank you for that. Thank you for weaving our journeys here together.
Anytime. I just knew it was going to be dynamic in general, because I'm like, yeah, they need to meet each other. Yeah, they need to be in the same space. Yeah,
So
I'm
good.
making this connection. That's happening. And as we close, just tell the people out there, I always end with a quote that means a lot to me. It's in my email tag if people haven't really gotten an email from me, but you will see it. And I'm gonna go and say the quote, and then go and be in community after this recording with my people. Is love people enough to tell them the truth, and respect them enough to trust that they can handle it.
So good. I have chills, man. That's really good.
That's what I need everyone to just really think about. But thank you for tuning into this episode. It has been absolutely phenomenal. And just tune in next week for another episode. And always be ready to do the work and show up and do the work, because this work is hard. And thank you also for listening, and we'll see you next time.